Hello everybody, and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about how to build various platform as a service, otherwise known as PaaS, services inside of Azure and how to integrate that with our private network. But first, my name is Mark Connolly, and I'm a cloud cybersecurity architect for Empyreon, and we help train people all over the world on various cybersecurity tools in the Microsoft 365 and Fortinet spaces. So if you've been keeping track with where we're at with the lab, we've got our on-premise stuff built. We've got our Fortinet firewall. I don't actually have an express route in this particular lab, but we have a VPN route, and we're only doing one site right now. If I really wanted to replicate a site too, I could using our Urbana or Danville locations, but that's just more work than I really need to do. We've got our vWAN built. We've got the user VPN. We got the site-to-site gateway, and we have a few networks peered, but the only thing we've actually built so far is a virtual machine. And a virtual machine is infrastructure as a service. And we've talked a lot about Microsoft 365 in the past, and that is software as a service. But there is a wide variety of tools that we can build in the cloud that's known as platform as a service, otherwise known as PaaS. So you got SaaS, IaaS, and PaaS. And there's a lot of differences between those, and we'll get into that. So let me pull up, there we go. So a long time ago, when I was trying to wrap my head around what the differences between these various as a services are, because back when this all started, literally like everything was a service. Like you got managed detection and response as a service, SOC as a service, like literally everything's as a service. But the core ones, especially when you're doing cloud infrastructure and things like that, is going to be on-premise, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And there's a tier of responsibilities that splits between you and your vendor depending on where you're at in that category, right? So on-premise, you got your on-premise firewall. You need to make sure all your network connectivity, all the flows going to whatever server infrastructure you have is secure. You manage the networking, you manage the storage, you manage the servers. If you're going to do hypervisors, Hyper-V, VMware, whatever, you're going to manage the virtualization. Inside of the virtualization, you're going to manage the operating system of the VMs, middleware runtimes, if you're running programs, web applications, whatever that is, the data that's inside of it, and the application that's running on the server. So like you're going to have a VM for this app 1. You're going to have a VM for app 2. You're going to have a VM for app 3. And we used to do that with Exchange, right? So you used to have Exchange servers, and they would be VMs on Hyper-V or whatever. Way back in the day, they were physical servers completely by themselves. But, 2000s or whatever, we started moving to Hyper-V, VMware, other hypervisor platforms, and then they became VMs. So you have an Exchange VM, but then Microsoft 365 came around, and we kind of skipped this platform as a service step, but we went straight to software as a service. They just product Exchange Online, and then they did SharePoint Online, and now we have Teams, and we have OneDrive that replaces file shares, and we have, Teams is really kind of like team storage that replaces like your department shares, and all of that kind of moved to software as a service because you don't manage any of that. Microsoft manages all of that. They manage the application, the data, runtime, middleware, the operating systems that run those things. You log into a web GUI and you just get the service. You don't really have to manage anything. I guess technically you do, especially with security settings. Every SaaS application has some set of settings in their back end. They integrate with SSO or they don't integrate with SSO, things like that. So there is a little bit to manage with SaaS, but for the most part, the core stack, I guess, is managed by the vendor, which is Microsoft in that case. And there's other software as a service, whether it's Dropbox or Salesforce or whatever the case may be. Those are all considered software as a service. So what is platform as a service? Platform as a service is where you pretty much just manage a few things, right? And this is going to be in the case of web servers, database servers, the AI stuff is all platform as a service, cognitive services, platform as a service, Key Vault as platform as a service. So, we're going to get in and we're going to configure a few of those things, kind of give you an example of what those things look like. But the thing that really made it make sense for me was I love pizza. So understanding the different tiers and kind of in a pizza context made sense for me. So if you have on-premise infrastructure, that's kind of like you're making your pizza at home. You're responsible for everything. You got to put the cheese on there, you got to put the toppings on there, you got to put tomato sauce on there. You got to cook it. You got to get the soda. You got to put it on the table. You got to serve it to everybody. You got to do the dishes. You're responsible for everything. But if you do take and bake, the preparation part's done for you, right? And that's kind of like infrastructure as a service, right? With infrastructure as a service, we don't have to manage the physical hardware. We still have a VM. We still have a network card. We can still go into the OS and run PowerShell and install whatever software we need. We have a full VM, but we don't have to manage the physical hardware. So that's kind of like take and bake, right? Pizza dough, tomato sauce, toppings, cheese, all the prep work, it's kind of done for you. Platform as a service is we're moving to pizza delivered, right? We still have to clean up the mess, but the pizza comes right to our table. So, 90% of the work is done for us. And software as a service, you go to Pizza Hut, wherever, and you go dine out and you get pizza. You don't have to clean dishes. You don't have to do anything. It comes to the table, you eat it, you pay your money, you walk out. Software as a service. Most of the responsibilities, you still have to eat, right? So there's still just a little bit of responsibility for you. So I don't know. Hopefully that helps make sense for you. It helped make sense for me because I do make pizza at home, and I do take and bake and deliver pizza, and I dine out a lot anyway. So that's kind of like platform as a service. So the key things that I'm going to build is going to be web services and file services. But in addition to that, web services, I'm going to integrate a component for a database and AI system, kind of like we did with our cognitive services. That one cost me a lot of money, so I'm not going to actually run those services. But I'll create them, and I'm going to create private IPs for them so that we can see how they communicate over the network. Central US, we got our Active Directory service built up. I'm also going to install, we also got Sentinel built up, another PaaS service. Forgot about that. We got Sentinel stood up. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. We got Active Directory. We're going to install Key Vault here. And then we're going to install file services over here on the right. And was there anything else I was missing? Might even stand up an Azure Function. Azure Functions is another platform as a service, and you kind of get to run code on a specific runtime environment that you want. You put PowerShell commands up there, and we can mimic kind of running automated PowerShell commands with like an automation account over the private network. So I might do that too. But yeah. And then I'll update this diagram to actually show like the full scope of everything that we've built so far. And we should be able to connect from our on-premise network, hit the file share over SMB protocols. When we initially build it, a good point that I should make is that PaaS is by default on public IP networks. So we are actually going to build them on public IP networks. We're going to transition them to private networks. You could do that in the actual building, but I'll do it both ways so that you can see if you're building resources from scratch, you can just kind of build private networking from the get-go. It's usually an option in the GUI. But if you forgot to, if things got built on public IPs after an object is created, you can also just go in and change it in the object as well. So we'll do that too. So let me pause here and I will get a few pieces of information that I need to build these assets written down in order so that I can just run through and get them built and record that. And I'll be back in a minute. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to build the storage account. I still got one lingering around from my knowledge base. We're going to ignore that one. I'm going to put this one in the Empyrean subscription. File services. No. That one's an East US. Oh. Oh yeah. Only lowercase. Okay. Alright, you happy it's all lowercase. Alright, let's put that into the East US. And I don't really need a whole lot of any of the advanced stuff, so I don't have to pay for it. Requires secure transfer via REST API. No anonymous access. Count keys. Azure AD access. TLS v1.2. We need to enable hierarchical namespaces. So this is for the Gen 2 storage. We're going to enable network system, file system. And we got hot access tier. So here is the networking. So by default, like I said, a lot of things are just going to come out of the box with this enable public IP address from all networks. So through the GUI and the wizard, one of the options that you can have is to just disable it here, and you can enable a private endpoint. And this is going to walk me through the wizard of actually creating a private endpoint. File services private. Storage sub-resource. I'm going to pick the virtual network we're going to put it on. And I don't want to integrate it with private DNS zone, as I don't really care about DNS right now. I got splintered DNS. Okay. These wizards take forever when you're doing like a wizard inside of a wizard. So I generally just like to set up my private IP endpoints and stuff and just not mess with all this, because if anything kind of gets hung up in the middle, you got to start all over. The validation fails. It's a pain in the butt. But data protection. So this will lock your, so you saw my knowledge base one was in there. I had data protection on the knowledge base, and if you put data protection on there, you're unable to delete it for a certain period of time. So we're not going to really mess with any of the data protection stuff because we want to scrap this when it's done. And then we have encryption. So like I think we talked about this with the VM and the disks. There's this concept of a Microsoft managed key or a customer managed key. We haven't set up a key vault yet. So I'm just going to keep this as a Microsoft managed key for now. But in a production environment, you would definitely want to use a customer managed key. And then we're going to do that for all of our service types. And not mess with any tags. And then hit review. And then when we're done, we should have a storage account that is only able to be accessed via private IP to the IP that we assigned. And it's going to have to go through our network path. So if I want to ping it from this machine, I got to travel through my FortiGate over the VPN to the Azure firewall, network peered to the hub, reach the file services, and then the network path back has to know how to get back to the firewall, back to the VPN gateway, back to the on-premise firewall, back to my machine. If that doesn't work, you're going to lock yourself out. So that's kind of where that public access tier comes from. Because there's a tool, I think, sitting here waiting on things to get deployed anyway. Yeah, this Azure Storage Explorer. For things that are on public endpoints, you can just use this application and access them directly via Azure AD authentication. Here we go. Go to resource. There you go. And there's this option here to just launch Explorer directly from the Azure console as well. So, this Azure data, Storage Explorer tool is pretty neat. If you're keeping things on the public access tier, you could do Azure AD authentication. There are business use cases where that is appropriate, but it's not always appropriate. So if you're creating like file shares and stuff like that, which is the use case that we have right here, it's way better to just have it on a private network, kind of like a private server, except it's platform as a service. All right, what do we want to build next? Okay, so the next one that we need to build is our web tier. And if we just go to web app, we should be able to just create an app service. And we'll go through the web app plus database. Yeah, we'll just do the whole thing in a single wizard. Web service. Now it's going to be in the west. .NET 6. SQL Azure, yes. Not available for your selected subscription location. Interesting. What about the West US? There's no SQL available in the West US. What? That cannot be true. This doesn't make any sense. California's on the West Coast. Let's try creating a database instead. Maybe if we do it that direction, it'll work. Not really sure what their wizard was doing. Oh yeah, let's do web services. Oh, no, wait, this is the database. Web app, database. And if we do West, okay, of course SQL is available in the West. I have no idea what that wizard was doing. All right, so let's do Azure AD authentication. Let's set our admin. Networking. Microsoft Defender for SQL. I'm pretty sure Microsoft Defender's on the whole subscription, but yeah, sure. Now we got a database, and that database is by default on the public internet, so I'm going to go through and manually put a private endpoint on it. The web app stuff is all going to be on the public internet too, so we'll have to put a private endpoint on that as well. All right, now let's set up some app services. App services can run web applications, and they can also run Azure functions. We're not going to use your wizard because I thought that was going to work. We're just going to create a regular web app. And let's do code. We want to run .NET 6. Let's do that in West US 2. We're going to create a plan. Pricing, let's make that basic. Don't need any zone redundancy. There we go, SQL's there. I don't need to do any GitHub integration. But so like publishing your code to the web app is an important thing. So there's direct integrations here where you can just publish your code through GitHub. You can also publish your code through Visual Studio or VS Code or whatever. There's a lot of different ways to publish your code. But the networking thing is the important one here. So yes, enable network injection is available for the basic tier. So let's go ahead and turn that on. I'm going to do web services. Yes, we know private endpoints are disabled if public access. Enable VNet integration. Outbound VNet is going to be the default. This is an important thing to deal with software-defined networking in Azure. If you create these subnets, so for this instance for the web app, I've got a /24 is the address space for the virtual network. And then I got a /26 for web services, which is what this is going to be in. I got a /26 for database services, and I got a /26 for AI services. But that's inbound communication. If you want these PaaS services to be able to do outbound communication, if they need to be able to talk back to private things inside of your network, you need to do what's known as this VNet integration, and that's going to send the outbound traffic through a specific subnet. So in this use case, what I did is I created the default subnet. I think I gave it like a /29 or something, and just it's a network that is just dedicated to outbound traffic for that particular address space. So we're going to select that here with our enable VNet integration, and then we're going to go to monitoring. Do I need application insights? No, I don't need application insights. I'm not going to be really using this web app more than doing pings and web tests. Uh-oh. That's what I was saying. You always get these validation errors. What does it mean, Microsoft? I can't put it in this region. Well, which West US region can I put it in? I'm going to have to create a new network now. Will you validate that way? Okay. I'll create a new network in West US then instead of West US 2. All right, so we're over here in our web services. And we created this virtual network in the West US 2 region, but when we created our app services, it didn't work like that. So now I need to move this to another region. And I need to put it in the West US region. So here you go. It's going to give you a validation screen. Make sure everything is the way that you need it to be before you click submit, and then it's going to move our network. Oh, apparently you have to click the box to acknowledge it too. All right, I'm back, and I got the network changed over to the West US, and I got all the resources moved over as well. So that's now peered to our VLAN, same way it was before. But let's take a look at each of these services and see what they're doing. So over here in our file services, we've got our networking, and we have public network access disabled, and we have network routing. Let's make sure we're doing that via Microsoft's network routing. We want to ride Microsoft's 100 gig backbone where we can. We got our private endpoint connection here. If we actually click into our private endpoint, we can see our network configuration for it. It's in the VNet, default, file services. Don't have any DNS configurations. We don't have any application security groups. If we look at it from the virtual network view, we can see over here on our left side, connected devices. We should have one IP in here. Yep, 10.0.4.4. So that's our file services. Go ahead and write that down while I'm thinking about it. Oh, 10.0.4.4. All right. So that's our file services over here on our web app. We are going to disable public network access. And we have a private endpoint over here, web app private. Same thing, we can click in here. We can see the important details about it. We can click into the VNet. This one. It's on the database subnet or something, for some reason. What's that, the database? File services. Yep, this one's web app. All right, so this is on the database subnet like it's supposed to be. And 5.68. It doesn't look like I have a web app on there yet. Let's go over here to our web app, go to networking. The web apps are a little bit funky. They get this little wizard, you know, you get these little bubbles because you can hook them up to CDNs and front doors, and you can do a whole bunch of other stuff. We're going to handle a lot of that through our virtual WAN because we're going to have an application gateway. It's just going to send the traffic back here privately. So let's take a look at our access restrictions. We don't want to allow public access. Let's save that one. And we do want to assign a private endpoint to it. So that's, I don't know what the difference between express and advanced is. Web app dash PRV. And let's put that in our web services, and let's put that in the web subnet. And we're not going to integrate any private DNS. All right, so now we got a private network on our web app. We're going to turn on VNet integration. Add VNet. Web services. And so I'll have to use the AI one. All right, so now we got VNet integration. And we should be good to go. We don't need a route table. I'm going to get into network security groups and application security groups later. 10.5.4. Okay. Come on. There we go. So we got a 443 test successful on that one. And that was our file services. 10.0.4.4. So let's 4.4 should be accessible on 445. Uh-oh, 445 failed. Ping failed too. All right, so we can get to our web app at least. 10.0.5.4. And I'd imagine we get a cert error and probably a default app landing page. All right, well, at least we got a response. So we know we can get to it privately. What is up with the file services? All right, I'll have to take a look at that and check that out. All right, so a little further digging, and the SMB port is not actually going to work because I'm not using a domain computer right now. So I can't send Kerberos or any type of Active Directory stuff up here for the SMB stuff, but It is actually connecting on 443, which is the default via private networking. So that's, we can prove that networking works at this point. I don't necessarily need to prove that SMB works. So there's our private networking. We got everything testing successfully, other than the SMB stuff. And it's all flowing through our firewall, so we control everything. So we took these platform as a service options, like the SMB file share. We don't have to manage the operating system of the file server. We just have to manage the file shares themselves. It's a platform as a service offering. We connect it to a private endpoint. We connect it to a virtual network. That virtual network is peered to our vWAN, which then goes to our VPN gateway and connects our on-premise network. Similarly, the web application, it's on a private network. We have our on-premise things that users want to be able to connect to that website. We want that traffic to route over the private network, VPN tunnel, through the vWAN, peers over to the West US, and gets to the web app service. And then if we wanted to hook up an application gateway, we could just peer a DMZ network in front of our vWAN, hook up an application gateway, put a WAF policy on it, and have it come in. So that's a PaaS private networking and how we can integrate it into our virtual WAN and our private network. Now we have a few more things. We did a few compromises last weekend, but Steve and I are going to be working on doing a little bit more this weekend here in a couple hours. So we have a few more things that we can attack now, right? So I hope this has been informative for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.